Standards Council, and Vice President of the Manufacturing, Engineering and Operations team at Rockwell Automation. At Rockwell, Mr. Yeo heads the industrialization, process engineering and program management, as well as regional manufacturing engineering organizations in the Americas, Asia Pacific, Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. A gentle reminder for all our participants to send your questions through the chat function, and we will try to have them answered. Let me hand the time over to Mr. Yeo and our panelists.
Hi, this is PW. I'm the moderator. First of all, I'd like to thank the audience as well as the panelists for taking part in this event. With all the discussion on the convergence of IT and OT, anyone embarking on the journey of Industrial 4.0 is thinking of connectivity and cybersecurity. Our objective today is to share some insight how company can implement connectivity and cybersecurity effectively. Before we deep dive into the topics, let's have a quick introduction of the panelists. Andreas, would you mind go first?
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Andreas Hauser. I'm the Managing Director of Digital Service at TÜV Süd. In TÜV Süd, or specifically in this digital service unit, we're developing new services for the connected smart world, and one focus is actually cybersecurity. So we're dealing with supporting the development of standards and instill the trust in these new systems so that they are basically scaled up to an industrial level. Thank you.
Thanks, Andreas. David?
Hi, I'm David. I'm the Managing Director for Back-Off Automation in Southeast Asia, and I also head up the OPC Hub ASEAN. It's the regional arm for OPC Foundation, which takes care of the standard of IEC 62541 for the world.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. I'm Chng, the CEO of Flexxon Private Limited. Flexxon Private Limited is actually a company specialized in cybersecurity to protect data at physical layer, where we use AI to fence off zero-trade exploit, and we eliminate the need for human intervention. We are proud to be able to contribute to Singapore's fight against cyber pandemic. Right.
Chris.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Chris Monchinsky. I am the convener of the IEC 62264 Standards Group, also known as Joint Working Group 5. And I am also Vice President of Automated Control Concepts, a company that specializes in the implementation of manufacturing operations management systems and the realization for many organizations and the journey towards smart manufacturing.
Something worth mentioning, Chris is joining from US through online and staying up late. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Chris.
No problem.
Yeah. Maybe let me start with a very interesting question. More connectivity means more risk. This is a very common saying or common discussion, especially true in the small and medium enterprise in Singapore, in this environment. I just heard this saying not too long ago. PW, I know connectivity is the fundamental for the Industrial 4.0, or you call it digital transformation. I know the importance of connectivity, but my concern is the risk. So I'm in the catch-22 situation. If I connect, more connectivity is good for transformation. If I connect, I may be wrong. If I don't connect, I could be also wrong. So I wrong, I don't do I wrong. How? So this is a very, very real situation for the industry. Maybe Andreas, you want to take this?
Yep. Yeah, sure. Clear answer. Yes, it increases the risk. I think we should be also very frank here. Connectivity means also you increase the threat level or the potential basically to being attacked. But let's go maybe one step back. Why do I need to connect, right? It's about Industry 4.0, digital transformation. IoT implementation. That means without connectivity, without connected devices, there will be no new business models, right? I will not be able to improve the efficiency of my assets, for instance, and I will not be able to collect all the data from the objects I'm looking at. So connectivity is a key enabler here. What we also see, which is quite interesting actually in insights reports, that those companies who are quite mature in their digitalization journey have already a high level of connectivity. So we see that this is a key enabler, but before connecting, one needs to understand what is exactly the case, what's the application, right? What do I want to achieve? What's the business objective? And then it boils down to a classical risk assessment approach. The same with safety we have, right? Everybody's used to consider safety as an inherent component. And the same happens now with security. It just has to be put into perspective. There is no 100% security possible, but it's always managing the risk. What's the pros and cons? And then it should be obvious what needs to be done. Yeah, also not randomly connecting all the assets. That makes definitely no sense. But be very clear and targeted in connecting. For instance, that you separate certain areas which are critical, right, with those where you can connect. And if something happens, the impact is limited. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing this balanced approach, and also showing a path forward for the small medium industry. Chris, you want to chip in on your view on this topic?
Well, I would agree that there is risk. I don't think there's any denying that. But keep in mind, though, there are also tools to mitigate that risk. So as I think Andreas said, we can't just go connect things blindly. We have to have a strategy. We drive that by understanding the business benefit for that. So that we don't just connect everything, but we connect the things that are going to enable and empower the business to be more flexible, to be more reactive, to be more efficient. And then we apply standards and good technologies in order to mitigate that risk. Well-designed networks with proper layering and isolation and monitoring are key. The isolation of sensors and instruments by function, so that when we are actually controlling instruments and equipment versus monitoring equipment for the purpose of performance, we isolate those things so that they are separate. We also implement redundancy, not just at the network level, but also at the sensor level, so that we can mitigate that risk. So I guess the question is not just risk, but sometimes cost as well.
Very good. Thanks. Anyone want to chime in?
Yeah, connectivity, I think it's necessary. It's like you having a phone, and with no connectivity, you can't call anyone. So that is really a clear example. Now, risk, it's as what Chris mentioned, some of this risk is already being mitigated in a way of use cases and also in the use of standards. So, for example, like IEC 62541, it has cybersecurity features built in to the interconnectivity layer.
Yeah, I'd like to build on what Chris just mentioned. Connectivity, it means cost. So that is also a very pertinent view from the small medium industry in Singapore context or in Asia Pacific context. Every time when we talk about connectivity, we are talking about increasing cost. We talk about increasing lead time for the project. Is this a myth, or is this there's some truth in this statement?
So probably I'll take this since I mentioned it in the presentation earlier. If we look at costs for a project, and does this increase because of connectivity? Some of the SIs or end users that I speak to says, yes, my implementers tells me that this will cost 20% more or 30% more. I think that's not true. From a very product level or on a machine level, maybe $2,000-3,000 increase over a $500,000 project, I think it's nothing. And it's not going to take you more time. It's like you are so used to driving a Toyota, and now you get the latest Tesla. Will it take you 1 month to learn how to drive it? No, it will take you maybe a couple of hours to get really used to the interface, but you're still able to hop in and drive. So if an engineer tells you that I need maybe to learn for a month before I can implement new things, I think you should seriously look at changing the engineer. No offense.
Very nice. Okay, let me get a little bit to more detail and build on what David and Chris just alluded to. If I were new to the connectivity, where should I start? What are the equipment that should I connect? Should I start from IT? Should I start from OT? Should I connect IT to IT, OT to OT, or IT to OT? How? Yeah.
This is a very high-level question that maybe Andreas can answer.
Also, IT and OT is merging, right? We all know that. And it's not about starting only at that end or at that end. I think, first of all, one has to create the awareness. One must be clear cybersecurity is a key point. And if I go the path of transformation, which I think is not an option anymore, either you digitalize or you're out of competition sooner or later, right? So there's no choice. I think this pill we have to swallow. Otherwise, we go back to the Stone Age. That's not an option. So basically, okay, clearly committed to digitalization, connectivity, then I have to deal with the cybersecurity topic, whether I like it or not. And the first step is always I have to understand what cybersecurity is, and particularly what it means to my situation. And I think this is also an issue sometimes, that it seems to be a huge problem, very complex, right? But one has to break it down and really apply it to the specific situation a manufacturer typically is, SME. They typically cannot afford a huge department dealing with cybersecurity. Mm-hmm. But they need to have an overall view, first of all, where are they? Also awareness, then an overall status where they are in terms of vulnerabilities, right? There are tools out there. We just launched this workshop agreement as a checklist for SMEs, right? They can then easily find out basically what are the key aspects they have to look into. That's also creating the awareness, but that gives them also already a kind of an understanding where they are. And there's other frameworks, the readiness index, they help them to make it a bit more tangible. And I think then when they understand what that really is about and can identify the gaps, and in many cases it's not very expensive also. What David mentioned, right? Sometimes it's just an authentication process needs to be put into place, right? Or users need to be just trained that, you know, you have to use proper passwords, also basic things as well, but it goes then, of course, into the specific technicalities. But I think the first step is really understanding where one is, and then prioritize these issues or these gaps potentially, and then, of course, incrementally fill them. I think that sounds all cumbersome and it's additional effort, but ultimately, let's put always the business objective in front of us, right? Why are doing this? Why I'm connecting or why I have connected devices? And I think when I have this business objective, then it's obvious what I need to do, because nobody challenges you on a construction site whether they should care about safety, right? This is in our DNA. And I think this needs to be also for security, put cybersecurity at the core of our culture and our operations. And then nobody will challenge that anyway. But of course, there must be always a connection to the business objectives. Yeah.
Yep. Chris, want to share your perspective?
Well, I would say that, again, when you are a small or medium-sized enterprise and you are considering which technologies or how to implement cybersecurity across, let's say, your organization, you do want to look at some different technology categories. So, obviously, if you're implementing a cloud strategy or you're implementing systems in the cloud, then there are some really good guidance out there on cloud security. Many of the vendors provide that. They have an impetus, the vendors themselves who provide cloud services, to make sure that you feel comfortable and secure with your data and uptime. There are also things within the organization that you can look to best practices. These are things that can be moved between IT and OT type organizations, such as incident response and investigation or automated threat detection. So there are commonalities between IT and OT technologies that we can share, and that can help streamline some costs as well, where we don't have to duplicate efforts or completely treat IT and OT as divergent spaces when it comes to cybersecurity.
Thanks, Chris. Another question I'd like to ask the panelists about connectivity is, any playbook or any easy reference or any best practices that for the small medium industry that they can benchmark
I think at the moment there's no so-called use. We look at use case. There's no guidebook where you say, let's refer to this 40-page guidebook to see what we can do. I mean, Siri assessments gives a good view to that, but then the next step is implementing it. But for SME, I think we can start really simple, just to connect your machines. Using standards, but connect for what? And connect what machines? I have an example. It's not an SME per se, it's a manufacturing plant, 40-year-old. They decided to do OEE, overall equipment efficiency measurements on the machines. They spent a couple of $100,000s to connect them to get this data. Right? Suddenly they feel that, hey, my machines are on, but it's not running. Or my machines are running, but the quality is low. Or the quality, so they do a lot of matrices and they find that there are things that they can improve. So this few $100,000 came back in 6 months. ROI 6 months. Productivity increased 40%. If they never embark on that project, they would never see this. They would assume that machines are on, people are working, my plant is running fine. So I think that is really a first step for smaller companies to get a taste. What data can actually do for you. And this is not even talking about the IT level, this is only talking about the machine data that you can get to give you good visibility of your production status.
Basically, are you saying connecting the individual machine together and making it to the system level data? So
it's not even talking about the machines talking to each other. It's just bringing it up to the SCADA, putting it up to your production monitoring, match it to your MES, and then you can see the efficiency of your machines. And that alone, it's already returning the investments within 6 months.
what you alluded to is the importance of visibility and transparency in the shop floor. Yep.
I mean, you know, the playbook is really kind of missing. Yeah, also, many companies do. Basically, everybody is doing it individually. And if you look into the standards, I would also call it almost jungle for someone who does not understand the details. Right, all these numbers, ISO 27K, IEC 62443, common criteria, labeling schemes, checklists, name it. Right, it's of course very complex if you step into this. So I think ultimately you have to create some in-house competence, whether you like it or not. Right? Of course, not the detailed expert in all the standards, but you have to understand what this entails, this topic in terms also of standards and best practices. I think this is no way around. And playbooks, as I mentioned at the beginning, kind of create the awareness. That means do some training, get some understanding, so that you can make an informed decision, and don't always think this is a huge problem I can't manage. Right? Also this awareness training, I think, is definitely part of the playbook, I would say. But as many companies or different companies are doing it differently, and yes, standards are best practice. We all agreed this is the best, but on the approach, right, we have not really a best practice on how you exactly should go about it, right? Also nationally, we have different initiatives. Singapore, we have this. In Europe, we have others, US. Also the approach is still not 100% clear. And I think that's also creates sometimes confusion. So that's why one needs to really also reach out potentially to experts outside their company, right? So to get some support. And that's anyway often also a refreshing aspect to get an external view on your situation, yeah. Because internal views are always potentially limited, yeah. But you have to have that playbook ultimately, yeah.
Yep, agree. There's no easy solution embarking on this I 4.0 journey.
Not an easy solution, but there's a huge potential, and that's exactly, I think that's worth it, yeah.
Yep. I think the repeated theme that I gathered is that we have to align this journey with the strategy. This is a scalable process. We have to make sense why we need connectivity, how we align with a business strategy, and how to manage the risk along the way. There's no one size fits all solution. Yeah.
And also for the smaller companies, maybe also maybe they don't need to do it immediately on their specific situation, but their clients, they may require basically specific cybersecurity requirements when they take them as a supplier. As a push comes clearly from big OEMs also. Chart of trust is just one example, right? To make sure that the supply chain is secure. And if you're not meeting these requirements as a supplier, you will be not part of the supply chain, right? Also, I think that's a similar thing like general digitalization. You have to do that. Otherwise, you will have a problem in the future and a competition.
Yep, and maybe let's switch gear to cybersecurity. We talk so much on we're so absorbed into connectivity. Let's look at the other part of the equation, cybersecurity. And how should the small, medium enterprise look at cybersecurity? And again, I'd like to go a little bit detail at the beginning. How should they start? How should they assess the situation? Do they really need it? Or what level of sophistication investment they need to have in this topic? So
I think we can start by addressing why they don't do that, isn't it? So most of the SME, they take lower priority for cybersecurity, and they did not invest enough for this particular aspect. And I would actually categorize this into 3 factors: A, C, and T. Now, awareness, cost, and talent, which what Andreas has mentioned just now. So, awareness, they might have a wrong concept that only the big company will get it. But as a matter of fact, SME are one of the most vulnerable group as a cybersecurity target, and they are accounting for 43% of the cyber attack worldwide 2020, and this year is already over 50%.
Wow.
And because they are not aware of such, that's why they take the cybersecurity lightly, the cybersecurity implementation lightly. And the second thing is cost. SME, as you may know, they already tied in the cash flow and the resources compared to the multinational company. So obviously, this is not what impacting their daily growth, their revenue, or their job. So they obviously will not put this as a priority and allocate budget or even consider to spend money in this particular area. And the third one will be talent. Without the capability of technical support, training, or even the education on how to address such threat, they actually normally the SME will be ill-equipped to the implementation step for how to actually introduce or adopt cybersecurity protection into their overall organization or even to their processes. But let's be aware, big organizations now are beginning to set cybersecurity as a requirement, especially data protection, to their partner and vendor. And for the long term, the reason behind it is there's a huge risk for the big organization's IP or confidential information being leaked through their partner who is not being protected. So in long run, I would say that the SME should see cybersecurity implementation as an investment but not an expenses, because along the way that they build up the cybersecurity, this will actually ensure that they not just build up their reputation but also provide a confidence to their partner and vendor that they are actually ensure them with they are on the aligned with their journey on cybersecurity protection. So I would say they should start looking into cybersecurity implementation, but they need to look at what is the core. So if let's say they have a budget concern, because there's many layers, many solutions in the market, they should look at what is effective to them and what is their core that they need to protect.
Yeah, I like to use a layman example to sum up what May just shared. This cybersecurity is no longer an insurance policy. It's a bread and butter. It's a competitive advantage for the company. It's not nice to have. Yep.
It's not nice to have. Yeah.
Chris, would you like to chime in?
Oh, well, I think you said it and summarized it best. As May had said, you can look at many different parts of cybersecurity. Which parts should you implement? Where should you concentrate? If you are a small or medium size enterprise, then you need to consider, what are your business objectives again? Is it being a participant in that supply chain? We call it a supply chain. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And they made that quite clear with some of the statistics that she had outlined. The SME organizations are also a critical link in cybersecurity. What do they need to concentrate on? Well, it depends again on their business objectives and their risk assessments. Are their partners implying or mandating that they have certain cybersecurity awareness, do certain audits, do certain challenges and tests to determine that they are compliant with their partner organizations? Then those are the things that they need to concentrate on. Can they afford to isolate equipment? Maybe they can afford to isolate some equipment, but the reality is, if that equipment is not flexible, if that equipment can't be changed and adjusted and monitored to improve its performance, as David suggested earlier with his OEE example, then they may be losing business opportunity. So unfortunately, a lot of the organization elements need to be considered, and they probably need to be prioritized and done in a certain order where they can be digested. The talent can be grown, as May had suggested. That's another important part of this. And also the cost can be borne over a period of time where it can be realized as a business opportunity and to build a capability for the organization.
Very true. Hey, there is a live question from audience. Let's take a quick look. There's a question: in one world concept, how would you advise the undertaking company in Revolution I 4.0?
That's a very specific question.
Yeah.
That's very broad. I mean, it's almost too broad to really address it, right? To companies, I just can advise that they have to, what I mentioned at the beginning, digital or dead, there's kind of this understanding, right? And they have to orient themselves towards accepted frameworks and standards, and then they don't do anything wrong, but they have to deal with it. Like Smart Industry Readiness Index, just one example where you basically then understand what Industry 4.0 specifically means to your company, right? It's an individual thing. So I think a tough one to really cover here in this format. At least this is my understanding.
Personally, I like the Siri, the way how it defines into 3 columns, the business, technology, and human. Yeah. And that human is often missing. Yeah. So that Siri gives a very good visibility. And it's very easy for a lay person to understand versus, let's say, other frameworks, which is a few hundred pages. I can't get through page 2.
Yeah, I think that's
same here.
That's, I think, the most important point, that it's usable. I mean, there are so many frameworks out there, and also with all due respect to our standards world, many standards out there, but they're not used because they seem to be very complicated and very difficult to manage. And what also Chris mentioned, it's not an implementation framework. It's defining in many cases, in many instances, also in a very abstract manner, what you need to do to translate this into an implementable action is not that easy. So I think it's important also for standards stakeholders like we are, that we make sure that it's usable, it's easy to access. And maybe just one example, in Singapore, together with Smart Manufacturing Federation and the standards from committee from ESG, we have developed that website, where you basically easily find out which standards are relevant for which areas in your company. And those kind of approaches, which makes it simply easier for companies, particularly SMEs, to really get into the topic, right? I mean, the IEC 62443, if you have this is like this pages long. We went through that exercise. It's painful. It's painful, exactly. And I think we have to really make it as usable as possible. Yeah.
There's also another live question just came in. Interesting. It's also very specific. Any insight for data protection? Classic approach for cybersecurity for connecting with China. Not sure why it's specifically single out China. Any I think this, to my point, this data protection, cybersecurity, there are equal risks from any country that we connect with. We can connect with China, we can connect with US, Europe. I think it poses the same risk because in the cyber world, it is borderless.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I would say, let's take away the word China,
Yep.
not to be irrespect, so that make it a broader. I would say when you look at data protection, all the while, cybersecurity approach has been coming from the 6th layer out of the 7 OSI. But there's the physical layer that has not been covered. So when you actually talk about data protection, at this point, you will realize that the big companies start talking about hardware-based ransomware protection. So this might be another way that you can look into, because when we keep talking about cyber hygiene, we are relying on human to actually keep doing your patching of software, updating your antivirus to achieve your cyber hygiene. But you will also realize that big company, they have a holistic cyber security infrastructure, but you see some cases that they will still being bypassed and fall into the victim of ransomware. The reason behind is because 95% of the data breach is caused by human error. And you cannot, it's so common that people forgot about their cyber hygiene after stay vigilant for a long time, and we call this cyber fatigue. So we actually need to take a step further to eliminate the human intervention and make it autonomous. So that I would say that the next step is you want to actually connect with the AI and make it autonomous, so that you do not have to rely on human intervention to achieve your cybersecurity protection.
Yeah, I can't concur more when you say the cyber fatigue, right? I recall COVID fatigue. COVID for 2 years, we already kind of like,
Yes.
we have enough of all these restriction, right? Let alone this cyber risk is forever.
Yeah,
Whenever there is
the main
internet,
thing is this is not their daily priority.
Yes.
Yeah.
We can't just keep reminding people to be safer.
Exactly.
We need to have a better tools. Yeah, but I follow. Thank you. Chris, any view from you?
Well, I would think that May is right that, if you want to secure data, we can recommend certain technologies, et cetera, but the reality is, from an organizational perspective, do not differentiate where that data goes or what partner you're working with or where they are on the planet. That's irrelevant. You are not going to be able to consistently maintain your security vigilance unless you do it at an organizational level and consistently. You have to implement consistent procedures and policies and technologies, enforce them, audit them, train people on them, and it has to be done across the board. It cannot be done in a singular fashion to one entity and not another. So I think it's irrelevant to distinguish the kinds of data, where it goes. It's more important to be broad and comprehensive about your organization's stance and training and auditing of cybersecurity, and that is what protects you against that cyber fatigue, as you pointed out. The ability for you to make a mistake simply because you have so many exceptions and so many different rules for the way data could be handled between different vendors or partners. I think that's a poor way to think of it. We really do think about it comprehensively. It makes it simpler for the organization to implement and maintain.
And also, I agree, Chris, particularly when it comes to personal data, for instance, right? And we know what's happening with the GDPR in Europe, for instance. If you breach that personal data law somehow, even if you're outside of Europe, right? You have to comply to these requirements to a certain degree. Otherwise, you may not be able to sell your products to these markets. Again, coming back, it's a must. You have to deal with this. You have to understand what are the different requirements in the different regions. They are different, yeah, unfortunately. I think there are definitely differences here, but ultimately you have to deal with it. It's the same like safety. If you sell a machine to a country and you don't comply with the safety requirements, you have a problem. The same as cybersecurity. So for me, this is pretty much the same analogy, actually.
And okay, let me back to the again, detailed level of cybersecurity. We joke about the gold standard, the so-called gold standard IEC 62443 is like a science project that thick. So I imagine you put myself into the SME shoe. So what should I do? I don't have the resources, talent to process that like 300 pages, standards. So, but after learning from this panel, if we do some impact, right? If we do carry some impact, they learn from this panel, they say, yeah, we need to do something. We cannot leave it, we cannot see it as an insurance policy, we cannot leave it by chance. It's not an option. I want to do something, but I cannot process this. So what should I do? Any advice from the panel, from practical standpoint, from SME viewpoint?
I think in the first place, they need to aware that it's not the number of financial amount that you pour into the cybersecurity, but the effectiveness cybersecurity solutions that you want to look at. Okay, so this is the first point. And I think in Singapore, for SME particularly, I would say we are very lucky that SMF, SDO, and Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore, as well as Enterprise of Singapore, have actually come together to include the vendor as well as the user to gather their perspective, to curate it and actually define a so-called cybersecurity self-evaluation checklist for the SME. So instead of going directly into ISO 27001 version, which is like what you say is a 300 pages, is a very costly process, SME can actually tap on what has been done for them, which is the cybersecurity self-evaluation checklist that make available for the SME now, that they can do a audit to identify what is their requirement and adopt the plan on what they can actually implement to their system or even enhance their current cybersecurity resilience. So I would say the good news is it's not very costly, but I just overheard that they have made it available in ITAP. So why don't the SME who is interested go direct to the Singapore Expo ITAP and explore about that? They might get something free out of it.
Wow, it's not easy to find something free in Singapore, Chris,
Yeah.
by the way.
I'm not promising,
This is the
but that's
sixth
just what
most
I
expensive city in the world. Okay. Thanks, May. Okay, there's another question from live audience. Is there a typical cyber security guideline which can be practically implemented by SME? I guess, well, what we discussed already covered that. And what I suggest that we move from the cyber security to the ecosystem. We talk about connectivity, we talk about cyber security. One of the pain point from the MNC over here is when they try to partner the local system integrator or the local solution provider, they got a lot of pushback that they are not familiar with this connectivity or cyber security standards. Literally is that we lack of the ecosystem to either to promote, to educate the entire ecosystem to get better of this this topic. So I'd like to hear from the panelists, what should we do about it? Maybe from Andreas?
Yeah, it's of course the whole thing works only when the ecosystem is in place, right? That's what we see. We have to put this cybersecurity really at the core of our culture, operations, and in a holistic view. I think the different countries are doing that. I mean, you mentioned Singapore, right? We definitely address the whole ecosystem, but it must be also clear that if you do not consider that, you will be not part of the ecosystem. I think a little bit like, not only, it would be great if you do it, but it must be also clear if you don't do it, you have a problem very soon, right? So a bit of sense of urgency and not like waiting until you have a breach, because those companies who had a breach, they obviously then they do what needs to be done, but many are still waiting to really invest into this, and that's what I like. It's not expenses, it's a clear investment. And the ecosystem, there's a local ecosystem, but there's a global ecosystem. And again, when you want to be part of this global supply chain, if you have not cybersecurity requirements in place, you will be not part of the future competition anymore or future market. I think that must be also clear.
Yep, we come to close very soon. You know, even in a minute or so, can we sum up key takeaways for the audience? Andreas?
I already started with wrapping up, I think. No, I mean, hard, of course, to collect now all the statements, but I think what we, as far as I see it, awareness is a critical point, right? You have to deal with this topic. You have to build up internal capabilities, yeah? And the most important point, I think what I really liked from you, May, that it's an investment and it's not just costs. I think this must be clear, right? And an investment has a return of itself, right? So, and that's how we should look at it. It's not just costs and a burden, it's absolutely an investment into the future.
It's not nice to have. I think that's yep.
That's my 2 cents.
Right. I think change is painful, change is challenging, but I also think that this is just a perception. Once you change and you look back, you find that it is really worth it.
Yeah.
So make that change.
Chris?
There are tremendous benefits in pursuing this smart manufacturing digitization journey. The way that we've treated assets in manufacturing in the past, they're fixed. We operate them for long periods of time. We get yield out of them, and then we retire them. What we find now is for especially small and medium-sized organizations, enterprises, they need to be nimble and flexible in the way that they manufacture and supply their product into the supply chain. To do that, we need a lot more modularity, a lot more interconnectivity, the ability for machines to be smart, to be changed in the way that we process our materials and manufacture. Those are going to require the embracing of these smart manufacturing and digitization technologies. And that in turn is going to require some vigilance and maturity with cybersecurity and connectivity. So it is, as we've said, an investment because you as an organization want to participate in this journey towards smart manufacturing and more flexible supply chain. And that's where you want to be as an organization in order to be productive and participate.
Okay, time is up. And I'd like to thank the audience and the panelists for the active participation. I hope you find this valuable. And with that, I'd like to conclude the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Yeo and panelists, for the lively discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of today's program, and we hope that you have found it useful in your field of work. I request all participants to fill up the post-event survey